As the launch of Grounded 2 draws closer and closer, some of the things I've been thinking about in terms of what I'd like to see when the game comes out are things that were either not in the first game that I'd like to see added to the second game, or things that were in the first game that I think could be improved upon in the second game. So what I want to do in this video is cover all the things that I've thought of. If I miss anything, let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoy this type of content, make sure to hit the like button and consider subscribing so you don't miss any future videos. So first up is going to be one of the things that, at least personally for me, I was asked about more than anything else, and that is an indoor biome. Many people would come to my live streams, comment on my videos, mention it to me in Discord or wherever. Will we ever be able to go in the house? I want to be able to go in the house. And it's a thing that I think a lot of people asked about because, well, it was in the Honey, I Shrunk the Kid movies, right? They ended up being in the yard, then they went in the house. And being inside of a building or a house would be a completely different environment than being out in the backyard. So I hope that they can add an indoor biome in Grounded 2. Now, I don't expect it to be at the beginning of the game because from what they've shown so far, there's no buildings, but there is a map on the table in one of the videos that shows what looks like a building towards the far side of the park that we can't see just yet. So I'm hoping that at some point we can go inside of that building, or at least there's like some type of indoor biome, whether it be it's like a bathroom or a snack shop or just a little office or something or an indoor sitting area. I think it'll be really cool if they did an indoor biome. Another thing that I personally was hoping to see in the original Grounded game that never came to fruition was weather or seasons. Now, I found it kind of weird that in Grounded it was always sunny every day. It must be a fantastic place to live. I'm sure most of us would like to live there. Every day is just a sunny day. There's no bad weather. It seems to be the same temperature all the time. And honestly, more likely than not, the reason they didn't do weather was because it would probably be very demanding on performance. And as we all know, they had to kind of cut content and scope the game down to be able to run on the older consoles. And one thing I always thought they could do was have sprinklers turned on in the first game, so it didn't have to be a full-blown rainstorm. Because if you think about it, if there was just like a tremendous downpour, it would probably ruin everything and it would just flood, it could flood everything. But I do hope they can find a way to add either weather or seasons into the game. So maybe it gets foggy outside, or maybe there's a drizzle, maybe there's light snow or something like that. I think that's something they could add in the game. It would add some dynamics to it. Next up, and this is something that is maybe I care about it more than most other people, but I know a lot of people commented on this because it was a feature that I think a lot of people just didn't care for because of the way it was implemented. And that is either more base defense options or no base raids at all. When they added the base faction reactivity back into the game, there was base raids when the game first launched. They took them out and they put them back in later on. There was just really no way of defending yourself other than just using your weapons. The turrets are okay, but they're not that great. The spike traps that you can put down, they'll slow down the basic enemies, but any kind of tough enemy is just going to get right through them. And they don't really help defend against flying enemies unless you put them all over the roof of your buildings, which would kind of look silly and just not very appealing. So if they're going to have base defenses in the game beyond just the mixers that we already know there's going to be mixers, I think they need to add more base defense options. And there's just tons of different ideas for traps. I've mentioned looking at other games that have similar things. They could look at 7 Days to Die. They could look at Fortnite Save the World, Orcs Must Die. Pretty much any game that has like a base defense mode, it would just be really cool if they could put more traps in there. Things that I could think of off the top of my head would be some type of wall dart or something, so we could just shoot arrows out at the enemies. A sticky trap, which could be from honey or something else. Maybe there's slugs in the game that drop slime or something like that. Anything that could just make the base defenses more, make them more fun to deal with and make people actually want to engage with them. If they're not going to do that, then I think they should just have faction reactivity off as just not even a thing. But let's assume they're going to have it because more likely than not, because there's mixers, there's going to be base defenses in the game. I feel like our bases are going to get attacked. If they're going to have them in there, if there's going to be faction reactivity, I think they need to be able to give us the ability to have a faction reactivity meter so that we're able to either access like a computer like we could in the first game where we would go to the field stations or to the labs and they'd have computers in them. Or there's something we can build ourselves where we can just go and check it and see, oh, the red ants are mad at us. Oh, the mosquitoes are mad at us. And those meters would fluctuate based on perhaps where you built or maybe your interactions with them. Personally, I'd prefer it be more of like, unless you actually build in an anthill or build right on top of something, that building on the map doesn't really affect the faction activity. Because to be completely honest, the faction activity map in Grounded, the original Grounded game, almost the entire map, where no matter where you build, you're going to get attacked outside of a very small number of areas, like the spawn area and then a couple other spots. Almost everywhere you build, something's going to be mad at you. So whatever the case is going to be, if there's going to be faction activity, I really think it would be cool if we could have a way to actively see who's mad at us and why they're mad at us. Along the lines with the building stuff is going to be more benefits from building. So, of course, I know a lot of people like to build just for the sake of building, and that's cool. Most survival games have base building in them. And a lot of the times, the base building, to me, feels like it's there just because it's a feature that they all have, and they don't really serve a purpose other than storing your stuff. Grounded did add the coziness feature, which was a good idea. However, the coziness feature in the original game only really impacts you when you're inside the confines of your base. As soon as you leave, you lose the buffs from it. So what I would like to see is more benefits from building, and that would be like, okay, you get a coziness level. That coziness level carries on for whatever the time period is for like throughout the day. So if you have a coziness level of like 2 and it gives you 5 minutes of not getting hungry or thirsty, that lasts no matter where you are in the world. You don't just have to be in your base, or whatever buffs they want to have along with it. Maybe it has lower stamina drain, maybe a faster health regeneration. Just give a reason to decorate the houses beyond just having them decorated. Because to be completely honest, at least for me, it's like, if that's all you really want to do and you just want to build and stuff, just go play creative mode. Like, what's the point of having all that stuff in survival if it doesn't really provide a reason? Now, on top of that, from just the buffs, they could make it where certain workbenches or crafting stations only work with inside a house. It could be like that has to have a roof over it or something like that. I don't know if they want to go that far, but I think it could certainly be, those are things they could think about in terms of like, you're building a base and you're building it for a reason, not just cosmetically. Next up is going to be less but more meaningful gear upgrades. Now, this has kind of been a hot topic. I think maybe I'm in the minority here, at least from the comments that I get on when I've mentioned it, is a lot of people seem to like the upgrading gear, upgrading weapons and armor in the first game. And I'm not sure how many of you guys that are for that experienced the game before they were in the game and then how they were implemented throughout early access. For those of you who were around since like the beginning before they were in there, it was kind of like a gut punch when you went from being able to get a good weapon and it did like a ton of damage, or you had good armor and it protected you really well, to all of a sudden now you had to spend a dozen hours just to upgrade it to get it back to where it was before. So I'm not going to argue the point of having gear upgrades, but I think there's 2 ways they could go about doing this that, at least for me, would make the game, I would just make the game more enjoyable, I think, overall for everyone. And when I say meaningful gear upgrades, I would say either you do it where there's only tiered upgrades, like it was before they did the actual upgrades in the first game. So it was like you got tier 1 weapons and armor, then you went to tier 2, 3, and 4. You would acquire those by defeating tougher enemies, going to tougher biomes and stuff like that. Or if they keep the current system from the first game and transition it over, rather than being able to upgrade gear like in the base game to level 9 or in New Game Plus up to level 15, maybe just have each thing's upgraded 3 times. That way, there's a reason to upgrade the tier 1 gear, because let's be completely honest, no one's upgrading tier 1 gear and no one's upgrading most of the tier 2 gear in the first game beyond a couple of levels, because you're going to get to the tier 3 gear pretty quickly and you don't want to have to run out of resources and go farm a bunch of resources just to get the tier 3 gear, which is the best in the game, until much later on, to the max level. So I'd rather them see, instead of nine levels of gear upgrades, reduce it to 3 and just make them more meaningful. And when I say more meaningful, rather than it being a 5% increase per level, have it be a 25% or a 50% increase per level. Just make it cost a little bit more. And the reason for that is because a lot of times you don't really realize that upgrading your weapons, for example, if a weapon does 5 damage and you upgrade it 4 times to get 20% more damage, it's doing 6 damage. That doesn't seem like it's noticeable, right? It probably isn't, because you're probably taking almost the same number of hits to kill the creatures. However, if upgrading it 1 time literally increased it by 50% or even doubled the damage it did, so if it went from 5 to 8 or 5 to 7.5 or 5 to 10, you would notice, because the creatures would be dying much faster. So along the same lines is going to be, I would like the option to toggle the UI to show actual numbers. This is something I asked for. I know others asked for it in the original game, and I understand why they didn't do it. It was kind of to keep the simplicity of the menus, but I also think that it would really, I don't want to say, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist here, but I feel like the reason they didn't put the actual numbers in there is because if people saw that you went from like only 5 to 5.1 or 5 to 5.2 when you did upgrades, you wouldn't even really think it's worth it. And that's the reality, because the numbers are so low. When you do a 5% increase, it's not noticeable. But I want to see the numbers in there. If they want to keep the current way of showing it, where there's just bars and meters that fill up and it's kind of vague, but you got to get the idea. Bigger bar means better. That's fine, but I'd like to be able to have an option to toggle on to show the actual numbers so that I can see when I'm doing it, when I'm upgrading things, or when I'm changing from one gear piece to another, what the difference is going to be. And the reason for that is, not only do I just want to know, but it's really easy for me to test things, to see how things are working. One of the things I spent a lot of time doing during early access of Grounded was testing weapons against creatures before they had in the ability to peep the creatures and see what their weaknesses and strengths were and how much damage was done. I would literally sit there in creative mode and just spawn enemies in and just sit there and attack them, right? or I would spawn, like go into survival and attack them. And I just sit there and record how many times it took to hit them with each weapon so I could figure out what they were weak to, how much damage they were doing and stuff like that. It was a very arduous process, and not knowing the numbers made it much more difficult. Later on, someone data mined all the information, and it did line up to mostly what I was seeing, but it would save a ton of time if we could actually see the numbers. And then along the same lines with that would be, and I know other people have asked for this as well, because at least someone asked for it in my last live stream, is show damage numbers in combat, or the ability to toggle it on and off. Again, I want to give people options. If you don't want to see this stuff, then you just hide it and don't see it. But like, if I hit an enemy, I want to know that my sword did 7 damage to it, or that my bow did 4 damage to it, and then have a number pop up that shows that if it's white, then it did the base amount of damage. If it turns yellow, then I know it did, like, it's weak to it. And if it turns like a different color, like red or something, or gray, then I know that it's resistant to it. That'll just be an easy way of knowing like exactly what's going on. I don't think it would harm the game in terms of like the overall aesthetics of it, and having it be an option of turning it on or off would give people, you could play it however you want and see it or not see it. Next up is going to be, this is going to have to do with traversal. With the map being 3 times larger, they did mention that at the start, we're not going to be able to unlock zip lines. And I know the base map is going to be like the size of the original map. Even with mounts, which it doesn't sound like we're going to be able to get mounts immediately. It sounds like, especially like the Orb Weaver mounts are going to be something that comes towards the end, or towards the later part of the what's currently in the game, right? It's going to be in the game either at launch or in, I guess at launch, which is going to be the first third of the map. With no zip lines, it's going to be like, there's got to be a way of getting around the map faster. And with the map being 3 times larger, something I'd like to see is the telepodies, if they're going to have them back, or some way of fast travel that is just lets us get around the map quicker. The telepodies were an awesome feature, but they're locked behind like New Game Plus 2, and very few people even got to experience them, because most people finish the game. Maybe they try New Game Plus, but they're certainly not grinding multiple levels of New Game Plus. Now, of course, some of the diehard fans pushing New Game Plus 5, 10, 15, 100, whatever it is, and putting tons and tons of time in New Game Plus, you got to experience all that stuff. But when a map's going to be 3 times as large, I'd really like to see a way of fast traveling available in the base game. And honestly, with the map being even the size, if it's going to be the base, the map at launch is going to be the same size as the map from the original game, the telepodies just seem like a feature that's just would be really cool to have in lieu of having the zip lines, honestly, because going from one side of the map to the other is going to take quite a bit of time. Along the same lines is going to be a better glider or a flying mount. In the first game, we had the dandelion toss, which just were basically a way of preventing fall damage. You really couldn't go too far with them. And with the map being bigger again, and with there being like looks like a lot more vertical areas to go to, like you can get on top of the speaker that's in the middle of the park. You can probably get on top of the statue, the hot dog cart, you'll probably be able to get on top of the ice cream cart. And then later on, who knows what's going to be in the other 2/3 of the map. Having a better glider where we could just make it out of like the wings of like the butterfly or something, and being able to glide across the yard as a way of fast travel, or even better, being able to get a flying mount like a butterfly or a bee or something like that. I think that would be really cool. Honestly, it might be cool to get like a wasp or a mosquito as a flying mount, because then it could attack for you, or even a bee. But I just want to be able to see like air traversal, because I think that would be a pretty cool feature to have, and it would also make navigating the larger map easier. Next is going to be water travel. So I know in the first game they were talking about, I think there were supposed to be like water skates or something like that were in the game. These are the bugs that like float across the top of the water. And it looks like from the trailers they've shown so far, there could be a large body of water in it. There's definitely looks like some type of pond that releases out into like a lake or something like that. So there's definitely going to be water in the game from what we've seen so far. We also don't know what's in the other 2/3 of the map yet, because it's kind of covered in the smoke. And being able to travel across the water will be a cool feature, whether it's using some type of skis, or maybe there's a bug. Maybe we ride I think they're water striders. Maybe we can ride the water strider across the water. I think that would be a really cool feature. And we also maybe could have something where we have like a tadpole or something that pulls us under the water so we can swim faster. Next is going to be food and smoothie buffs that are more impactful. So the food would basically fill you up, and the smoothies would give you a buff for usually like, I don't know, a couple of minutes. And a lot of times the percentage they would give you, honestly, just you didn't even notice them. You might think you noticed them, but you really didn't. One that I can think of just right off the top of my head, the one that's the most glaring was the Black Ox Burger, which, to be completely honest, was pretty expensive to craft in Grounded. And the buffs that it gave you I think it gave you more health, max health, and it gave you damage resistance, but the damage resistance it gave was like 2% or something like that. So it was actually like less damage resistance than other things in the game that were just, I don't know. It just, in terms of balancing and in terms of how much it gave you, it just made absolutely like no sense on how little it was. And I'd like to be, like I said, I want things to be more meaningful. I'd rather have less things that are more meaningful than just having a bunch of things that give you like small numbers. I think everybody likes big numbers. So I'd like to see the food and smoothie buffs just be more impactful. Like if you drink this smoothie that's going to make you faster, you're literally running like twice as fast and you can notice it. Or if you eat this food that's going to give you damage resistance, rather than like a quarter of your health being taken away from an enemy, only like a tenth of your health is taken away from the enemy. Things that you can actually see happening and are not just like, they almost feel like a placebo effect where you're just not really getting a benefit out of them. Along the same lines with the food is going to be more in-depth farming. So of course in Grounded, the original game, you could have the garden patch, and I know for myself and like pretty much everybody I know that played the game and everybody I watched play the game, there was very little use out of the garden patches. Honestly, it seemed like most people used them just for decorations. I know personally the only thing I ever used them for was growing mussel sprouts, because that was really the only thing worth growing. I didn't see a sense in growing mushrooms because I could just go find mushrooms somewhere. I didn't see a sense in growing like grass because there's grass everywhere. So being able to like plant more crops and having it, I don't want to have to water it. Like I certainly like the fact that you just plant the crops, come back and they're done, and you go put fertilizer on them to make them better. But just having a more robust farming system where you can grow more things, so you could kind of have like a self-sustaining food source rather than having to constantly go out and find food. I think that would be something cool. Now, it doesn't have to be like right off the rip. You can just grow a farm that supports you for the rest of the game, but something you could unlock as you progress. Maybe there's multiple tiers of the garden patch that get bigger and bigger and grow more things. That would be pretty cool to have. Along a similar line in terms of like resource things is going to be the ability to automate more resource collection. So in Grounded, you could put up the sap collectors and come back the next day and there'd be like 4 or 5 sap in there. And that was pretty cool. But there were a lot of resources that was like, man, I need these things. And I think it would be great if there would be a way to automate other resource collection, whether it be, I guess you could also you could automate collecting the juice from the juice boxes, right? So those are 2 things that were in the original game. But with so many resources in the game, I think it would be cool if there was just a way to automate more resource collection. Think things like Minecraft farms, where in Minecraft, you could basically build a farm to automate the collection of anything. I'm not suggesting we need to go the full automation route where you just sit there AFK and 4 hours later you have everything you could possibly need for the rest of the game, but just more ways of automating resource collection, especially resources that you need a lot of. And then the last thing I could think of was less resources in general. So this is not just a thing this isn't like a problem that was just in Grounded. This is like literally in almost every crafting game, resource bloat. You start out with a couple of resources, and then throughout early access or development, you add more on top of it and more on top of it. And what ends up happening is a lot of the early game resources become irrelevant. Now, in Grounded, I guess sap you use throughout the game, but there's things that's like, oh, you get a thistle needle, and once you got a bunch of thistle needles, you could farm them the first like couple minutes playing the game. You'll use them for arrows, but then later on, it's like maybe they're using a recipe here or there. I think they're using some of the boss recipes, but it's like it's not something you have to constantly go back and get. What I would like to see is just like half the resources, but they're used in twice as many crafting recipes. Example being like in Grounded, there was nectar. Nectar was in like a single cooking recipe. It was like, why did it exist? Why not have nectar be the base of one of the smoothies? Why not have nectar be in other foods? Why not have nectar be a trap that you can place down that's sticky or something? I don't know. I'm just like thinking things like that, where it's so you're not having to have 500 chests and your inventory's constantly full. That's the big thing with survival games is inventory management, right? Seems like everybody's always asking for, can I have a bigger backpack? We need bigger chests and stuff like that. If you just like have the resources and made more uses out of those resources, it also gives a reason to go back to areas that you might not ever have to go back to, right? Like think about Grounded. You would go to the hedge to get the berries, and then they eventually added some berries up in the upper yard. But honestly, you really don't need berry leather or berries after like halfway through the game, right? So it would give reasons to go back to those places to get that stuff, because it was like, oh, if the berries were only in one spot and they were needed in recipes like super late game for whatever it might be, armor or food or building things like that, then you'd have a reason to go back there. So those are the things I could think of that I would like to see in Grounded 2. Like I said, they've shown off so many things that look like awesome, like the mounts and just the new biome, like the coal biome and stuff like that. There's a lot of new weapons, a lot of new creatures that we're going to be interacting with. But these are some of the things that I thought of that hopefully they can consider adding over time, or some variation of them as we go through the early access period. So anyway, if you found the video enjoyable, make sure to hit the like button. Consider subscribing for more content just like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.